Mom will watch the baby, my daughter-in-law announced before I had even finished swallowing my sip of iced tea. The room erupted with smiles, congratulations, and excited chatter, but all I could hear were those 5 words. Not, would you be willing? Not, could you help us? Just a decision. Already made. Already assigned. My name is Margaret Collins. I'm 68 years old, a retired elementary school teacher from Ohio, and apparently, according to my family, my future had just been planned without me. It was a warm Sunday evening in late spring. Ethan and Ashley had invited everyone over for dinner. Their 2 children were racing through the backyard chasing bubbles while hamburgers sizzled on the grill. Everything felt normal. Happy even. When Ashley tapped her glass with a spoon, everyone turned toward her. Her cheeks were glowing with excitement. Ethan wrapped an arm around her shoulders. We have news, she said. Baby number 3 is on the way. The table exploded with applause. I smiled immediately. I truly was happy for them. A new baby is a blessing, and seeing my son become a father had always filled me with pride. Ashley laughed as everyone celebrated. Then she placed a hand on her stomach and glanced toward me. The best part is we already have childcare figured out, she said. Mom will watch the baby when I go back to work. Several heads turned toward me. My smile froze. For a moment, I honestly thought she was joking. I waited for the punchline. It never came. Ethan nodded casually. Yeah, it's perfect. Perfect. The word landed heavily in my chest. I set my glass down carefully. No one noticed. They were already discussing schedules, daycare costs, and maternity leave. They were building plans around my life, as though I were a piece of furniture that never moved. I looked around the table. My son was smiling. Ashley was smiling. Even my grandchildren were laughing nearby. Yet somehow I felt completely alone. This wasn't the first time. When their oldest was born, I had canceled a trip with friends to help. When the second arrived, I spent nearly every weekday driving across town before sunrise so they could save money on childcare. I never complained. I loved my grandchildren, but loving them and surrendering my life were not the same thing. Over the past year, I had started making plans of my own. Small plans. Modest plans. A road trip with friends. A photography class. Maybe even the cross-country RV tour I had dreamed about since retiring. For the first time in decades, my calendar belonged to me. Apparently, no one else had gotten that memo. Ashley finally looked directly at me. Isn't that great, Margaret? She asked. Every conversation stopped. Every face turned my way. I could feel the expectation hanging over the table. They were waiting for the answer they had already written for me. I took a slow breath. Then I said a single word. No. The silence that followed was unlike anything I had ever heard. And when I looked at my son, I saw an expression on his face that chilled me more than anger ever could. The drive home felt longer than usual that evening. The sun was setting over the Ohio countryside, painting the fields gold, but I barely noticed. My hands rested lightly on the steering wheel while the conversation replayed itself in my mind. Not the announcement, not even my answer. It was Ethan's face after I said no that stayed with me. There had been confusion at first, then disappointment, and finally something else. Something that felt uncomfortably close to resentment. I pulled into my driveway just after 8 o'clock. The small brick ranch house had been mine for nearly 30 years. It was quiet, peaceful. For the first time all day, I could hear my own thoughts. I set my purse on the kitchen counter and looked at the calendar hanging beside the refrigerator. 3 dates were circled in red. A photography workshop in June. A weekend trip to Nashville with friends in July. And the biggest dream of all, a 6-week RV tour through several national parks scheduled for early fall. I had spent months planning it, saving for it, looking forward to it. After raising a son, caring for my late husband through years of health challenges, and dedicating more than 3 decades to teaching children, I had finally started building a life that belonged to me. Yet somehow, sitting at that dinner table, it had become obvious that nobody else saw it that way. My phone buzzed. A text message from Ashley. I already knew what it would say before I opened it. I think you caught everyone off guard tonight. We can talk later and figure things out. Figure things out. As if my answer had been the beginning of a negotiation.
as if no simply meant not yet.
I placed the phone face down on the counter without replying. 10 minutes later, another message arrived. This one from Ethan. Mom, Ashley is upset. We were counting on you. I stared at those words for a long moment. We were counting on you, not asking.
Counting.
The distinction mattered, more than they realized. The next morning, I met my friend Carol Whitman for coffee at a small diner downtown. We had known each other since our 20s. Carol took one look at my face and pushed a blueberry muffin toward me. All right, she said. Tell me what happened. By the time I finished explaining, she was shaking her head. Margaret, do you know how many times you have changed your plans for those kids? I laughed softly. More than I can count.
Exactly.
And now that you finally want something for yourself, they act surprised. I stirred my coffee slowly. The truth was, I had been surprised too. Not by Ashley. I had come to expect certain things from Ashley. But Ethan was different. Or at least I thought he was. Carol leaned forward. You know what I think? She asked. I think they stopped seeing your help as a gift a long time ago. They started seeing it as part of the family budget. Her words settled heavily in my chest because deep down, I knew she was right. And as I drove home later that afternoon, I began to wonder how many other decisions about my future had already been made without me knowing it. 3 days passed before I heard from Ethan again. Not a phone call. Not a visit. Just another text message that appeared on my screen while I was watering flowers on the front porch. Mom, can we talk? I stared at the message for a moment before setting the phone down beside me. The hydrangeas needed attention. The weeds along the walkway needed pulling. For years, I had dropped everything whenever my family called. Suddenly, I realized I did not have to. Later that evening, I finally responded and agreed to meet Ethan for lunch the following day. He arrived 10 minutes late. That alone told me something was wrong. Ethan had always been punctual. He slid into the booth across from me and immediately looked exhausted. Dark circles sat beneath his eyes. He glanced around the restaurant before lowering his voice. Ashley is still upset. I folded my napkin onto my lap. I assumed she would be. He sighed heavily. You know this is not what we expected. There was that word again. Expected. As if my life existed according to a schedule they had written. I waited. Eventually, he continued. Childcare costs are expensive. We thought this arrangement made sense for everyone. I looked at him carefully. Did it make sense for everyone, Ethan? Or did it make sense for you? His expression tightened.
For a few seconds, he said nothing.
Then he looked away. That silence told me more than any answer could have. After lunch, I drove home feeling strangely unsettled. Something about the conversation did not sit right with me. It was not simply that they expected my help. It was how confident they had been. How certain. Almost as if detailed plans had already been made long before that dinner announcement. 2 days later, I accidentally stumbled across something that made my stomach drop. I was helping my granddaughter Emma print a school project while she stayed at my house after soccer practice. She logged into a shared family email account on my laptop to access a document. Before she left the room, a message notification appeared in the corner of the screen. Normally, I would have ignored it, but a subject line caught my attention. Grandma Childcare Schedule Draft. My heart skipped. I should have looked away. Instead, I clicked. The email chain stretched back nearly 4 months. For months, there were spreadsheets, proposed schedules, vacation plans, work calendars. Ashley had mapped out nearly an entire year of childcare coverage. Mondays through Fridays. 7 in the morning until 5:30 in the evening. School pickups. Doctor appointments. Summer activities. Every responsibility had already been assigned. Beside nearly every task appeared the same name. Margaret. My name. Not once did I find a message asking whether I agreed. Not once did anyone suggest discussing it with me first. They had simply built my future into their plans as though my time belonged to them. I sat frozen in front of the screen. The quiet house suddenly felt different. Smaller somehow. I scrolled through another message. Then another. One sentence finally stopped me cold. Ashley had written it to Ethan nearly 2 months earlier. Your mother has nothing else going on. She will do it. She always does. I read those words 3 times. Then I slowly closed the laptop. For years, I believed I was helping because I was loved and appreciated. Sitting alone in my living room that afternoon, I began to wonder if I had simply become predictable. For the next several days, I carried that email with me everywhere, even though it existed only in my memory. I did not print it. I did not mention it. I simply let it settle quietly inside me. The words refused to leave. She will do it. She always does. At first they hurt. Then they embarrassed me. Eventually, they began to teach me something. One evening I sat on my back porch watching the sun disappear behind the trees at the edge of my property. The air smelled like fresh-cut grass. A neighbor was walking her dog down the street. Everything looked peaceful, but my mind kept drifting backward through the years. Once I started looking honestly, the pattern became impossible to ignore. When Ethan and Ashley bought their first house, I spent nearly every weekend helping them paint walls, assemble furniture, and unpack boxes. When Ashley wanted to finish a certification program, I rearranged my schedule to watch the children 3 days each week. When Ethan traveled for work, I often stayed overnight to help with school mornings. At the time, I told myself that was what family did. Family helped each other. But family also respected each other. That was the part that seemed to be missing. The following Saturday, I attended Emma's soccer game. I sat in the bleachers with a bottle of water and a folding chair just like dozens of other grandparents. Emma spotted me immediately and waved. My heart melted. None of this was about my grandchildren. It never had been. I would move mountains for those children. What troubled me was the growing realization that somewhere along the way, my kindness had quietly transformed into an obligation in the eyes of their parents. After the game, Ashley approached me near the parking lot. Her smile looked polished, almost rehearsed. "The kids were happy you came," she said. "I would not miss it." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she sighed dramatically. "I still think this whole thing is being blown out of proportion." There it was. Not an apology. Not understanding. Just frustration that I had disrupted the plan. I looked at her calmly. "Which part?" Her expression tightened. "The childcare situation. We are family. Families help each other." I nodded slowly. "They do." Her face brightened for an instant, as if she thought I was finally giving in. Then I continued. "But families also ask. They do not assign." The brightness disappeared immediately. She looked away and crossed her arms. "I think you are making this harder than it needs to be." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I finally understood something important. Ashley genuinely believed I was the problem. In her version of the story, I was not a woman protecting her time and independence. I was an obstacle. As I drove home later that afternoon, I felt surprisingly calm. The guilt that had followed me since that dinner announcement was beginning to fade. In its place came clarity. For years I had worried about disappointing other people. Now I was starting to wonder what it had cost me to keep everyone else comfortable. And for the first time, I was no longer afraid of the answer. The punishment did not arrive all at once. It came quietly, wrapped in little moments that would have been easy to dismiss if they had happened only once. A family dinner I learned about afterward through photographs on social media. A weekend outing with the grandchildren that no one mentioned until it was already over. A birthday party invitation that somehow never reached me. Each incident carried a convenient explanation, a misunderstanding, a scheduling mistake, a forgotten message. But after a while, even the most generous person stops believing in coincidence. By the middle of summer, the distance had become impossible to ignore. The phone rang less often. Text messages became shorter. Replies arrived hours later, sometimes days. One evening I sent Emma a message wishing her luck before a school performance. The response came from Ethan instead. "Thanks. We have everything covered." Everything covered. The words felt strangely familiar. That seemed to be the new theme of my relationship with my family. They had everything covered. They did not need my opinion. They did not need my plans. They only needed my help when it fit their schedule. I refused to let bitterness take root. Instead, I focused on my own life. I attended my photography class every Thursday evening. I joined a local travel group. I spent mornings walking through a nearby park with my camera hanging from my shoulder, searching for small moments of beauty I had rushed past for years. A red cardinal perched on a fence, sunlight filtering through maple leaves, reflections dancing across a quiet pond. The more I invested in myself, the more I realized how much of myself I had given away. Then one afternoon, quite by accident, I overheard something that changed everything. I was browsing a bookstore downtown when I spotted Ashley standing near the magazine section speaking with a woman I recognized from one of Emma's school events. They had not seen me. I was about to wave when I heard my name. Instinctively, I stopped. "I cannot believe she said no," Ashley was saying. "Honestly, she is retired. What else does she have to do?" The other woman laughed politely. Ashley continued. "We practically built our plans around her. Now she is acting like she suddenly has this exciting life." The conversation lasted less than a minute. I walked away before either of them noticed me. My chest felt tight, but not from sadness. Not anymore. For the first time, I felt something else. Relief. Relief that I finally understood the truth. Ashley had never been angry because I could not help. She was angry because I had stopped being predictable. That evening, sitting alone on my porch, I watched the sun disappear beyond the trees. The sky glowed orange and gold. My phone remained silent beside me. Strangely, I did not mind. Somewhere along the way, they had mistaken my generosity for obligation. Now they were discovering something I should have learned years earlier. A woman who knows her worth becomes very difficult to control. By August, my life looked very different from the one Ethan and Ashley had planned for me. Every week seemed to bring something new. One weekend, I was photographing waterfalls with a travel group in Pennsylvania. The next, I was attending a photography exhibit in Columbus. My calendar was no longer filled with obligations. It was filled with choices. The difference felt remarkable. One morning I sat at a small cafe overlooking a river while reviewing photographs on my laptop.
My phone rang. Ethan.
It was the first time he had called in nearly 3 weeks. I answered calmly.
Ethan.
His voice sounded tired. Much more tired than I remembered. We exchanged a few polite comments before a long silence settled between us. Finally, he spoke. "Things have been difficult lately." I waited. "Childcare has been more expensive than we expected." There it was. Not an apology. Not a conversation about our relationship. A problem. A practical problem. I looked out at the water flowing past the cafe windows. "I am sorry to hear that," I said honestly. "Raising a family was expensive." I understood that. "We have been trying different arrangements," he continued. "Nothing seems to work." Another pause followed. I could almost hear him searching for words. Ashley had to cut back some of her hours. I nodded quietly even though he could not see me. For years I would have immediately started solving the problem, offering ideas, rearranging my schedule,
Sacrificing something.
This time I simply listened. The conversation ended politely. Neither of us mentioned childcare directly. Neither of us needed to. A few days later, I received an invitation from Carol to join a 2-week bus tour through several western states the following spring.
We
would visit national parks, historic towns, and scenic overlooks. The younger version of me would have hesitated. She would have checked everyone else's schedule first. She would have worried about being needed. Instead, I mailed my deposit the very next day. That evening, I felt lighter than I had in years. Then September arrived, and with it came another surprise. During a community fundraiser downtown, I ran into one of Ashley's friends. We chatted for a few minutes about local events and mutual acquaintances. Then she smiled awkwardly. "I have to admit something," she said. "I thought you were angry at your family." I blinked. "Why would you think that?" Her expression shifted immediately.
Oh.
Maybe I should not have said anything. But the damage was already done. A few careful questions later, the truth emerged. According to several people in Ashley's social circle, I had stepped away from helping because I wanted more freedom and less involvement with my grandchildren. The story had traveled surprisingly far. I listened quietly. I did not argue. I did not defend myself. As I drove home that night beneath a sky filled with stars, I realized something important. Ashley had been telling people her version of events for months. She was trying to protect her image. But the truth has a curious habit of revealing itself over time. And somewhere deep down, I had a feeling that time was finally starting to work in my favor. October arrived with crisp mornings and bright red leaves scattered across my yard. For the first time in years, I felt genuinely excited about the future. My photography group organized a week-long trip through several New England states, and I signed up without hesitation. Every day brought something new. Covered bridges in Vermont. Coastal sunrises in Maine. Small-town cafes where strangers became friends within minutes. I carried my camera everywhere. More importantly, I carried none of the guilt that used to follow me. One afternoon, while standing beside a lighthouse overlooking the Atlantic Ocean, my phone buzzed repeatedly. 3 missed calls. All from Ethan. I listened to the voicemail later that evening from my hotel room. His voice sounded strained. Mom, call me when you get a chance.
No explanación.
No details. Just urgency. I returned the call the next morning. Ethan answered immediately. Where are you? He asked. Maine, I replied. A long silence followed. You are still traveling? I smiled to myself. That was always the plan. He exhaled heavily. Things have gotten complicated. Over the next several minutes, the situation slowly emerged. The childcare arrangement they had finally settled on had fallen apart. One provider had resigned unexpectedly. Another could only offer limited hours. Ashley's work schedule had become increasingly difficult to manage. Every solution seemed temporary. Every backup plan created new problems. I listened quietly. Months earlier, hearing this would have filled me with anxiety. I would have immediately started searching for ways to help. Instead, I found myself staring out the hotel window at fishing boats moving across the harbor. For the first time, their emergency did not automatically become mine. I am sorry things are stressful, I said. And I meant it. Parenting was hard. Life was hard. But those truths did not create an obligation for me to surrender my own life. A few weeks later, after returning home, I attended one of Emma's school events. During intermission, several parents approached me. To my surprise, many of them already knew about my recent travels. Carol had posted some of my photographs online, and people had been sharing them. One mother smiled warmly. Your pictures are incredible. I had no idea you traveled so much. I laughed. Neither did I. The comment stayed with me all evening. For decades, I had been known primarily as someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's grandmother. Important roles. Beautiful roles. But they were not the whole story. Somewhere along the way, I had forgotten that I was also Margaret. A woman with interests, dreams, talents, and plans that existed independently of everyone else's expectations. As I drove home beneath a sky glowing with autumn colors, my phone buzzed again. A text from Ethan. This time it was only one sentence. We need to talk soon. I stared at the screen for several seconds. Before setting the phone aside, something had changed. The confidence that once surrounded their assumptions was gone. Reality was finally catching up with the plans they had made without me. The conversation happened 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. Ethan asked if he could stop by after work. His message was polite, almost careful. That alone told me more than the words themselves. The old Ethan would have simply shown up. The new Ethan seemed uncertain. When he arrived that evening, he looked older than his 38 years. Stress has a way of changing people. We sat at my kitchen table with mugs of coffee between us.
For a few minutes we talked about ordinary things.
The weather, Emma's school projects, my upcoming travel plans. Neither of us mentioned the real reason he had come. Finally, he leaned back in his chair and rubbed his forehead. I think I owe you an apology. The word surprised me, not because I had stopped hoping to hear them, but because they arrived so quietly, without excuses, without conditions. I said nothing. Ethan stared into his coffee. I did not realize how much you were doing for us. I almost smiled. The irony was difficult to miss. The work had not changed. Only its absence had become visible. He continued. When you stopped helping, everything became complicated. There was no anger in his voice now. Only exhaustion. Over the next hour, pieces of the story emerged. Childcare costs had climbed far beyond what they expected. Schedules constantly shifted. Sick days created chaos. Missed work affected income. Every solution seemed temporary. Every replacement came with new problems. I listened quietly. Not because I enjoyed hearing about their struggles, but because I finally understood something important. Reality was teaching lessons that no argument ever could. Then Ethan said something I had not expected. Ashley and I have been fighting a lot. He looked embarrassed the moment the words left his mouth. I did not ask for details.
I did not need them.
Pressure has a way of exposing cracks that were already there. For months they had treated me as the missing piece in a plan. Now they were discovering that no family should be built around assumptions. As Ethan prepared to leave, he paused at the front door. Mom, were you really planning that cross-country trip? I laughed softly. I already paid for most of it. For the first time all evening he smiled. A genuine smile. The kind I had not seen in months. You seem happy. The observation lingered in the air between us.
Happy.
It felt like such a simple word. Yet I realized how long it had been since anyone in my family had asked whether I was. After he left, I stood by the living room window watching his car disappear down the street. The house felt peaceful. Not lonely. Peaceful. There was a difference.
My phone buzzed later that night.
A message from Carol asking whether I wanted to join another photography trip the following summer. I replied immediately.
Yes.
Somewhere along the way, I had stopped waiting for permission to live my own life. And the more fully I embraced that freedom, the more obvious it became that the people around me were finally beginning to see me as a person again instead of a resource. Thanksgiving arrived cold and clear. The trees were bare now, and a thin layer of frost covered the grass outside my kitchen window. I woke early, brewed coffee, and stood quietly watching the sunrise. A year earlier, I would have spent the morning rushing to prepare dishes for someone else's table. This year felt different. Peaceful. Around noon, there was a knock at my front door. When I opened it, Ethan and Ashley were standing together on the porch. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Ashley surprised me. Can we come in? She asked softly. We sat around the same kitchen table where so many family conversations had happened over the years. The silence felt uncomfortable at first. Ashley stared down at her hands. Ethan looked nervous. Finally, Ashley took a deep breath. I owe you an apology. The words seemed difficult for her to say, but they were sincere. I thought I understood everything you did for us. I did not. I listened quietly. She continued. I was frustrated. I was overwhelmed, and I convinced myself that you were being selfish. Looking back, I can see how unfair that was. The room fell silent again. Months earlier, I might have felt triumphant hearing those words. Instead, I felt something simpler. Relief. Not because I had won anything, but because the truth was finally being spoken aloud. Ethan looked at me. We built our plans around assumptions, Mom. We never stopped to ask what you wanted. I nodded slowly. That was the hardest part. Ashley's eyes filled with emotion. I know. We talked for more than an hour. Not about childcare schedules or family obligations. We talked about boundaries, respect, expectations, things we probably should have discussed years ago. At one point, Ethan asked whether I would ever help with the children again. I smiled. Of course I will. I love my grandchildren. Both of them looked relieved. Then I added gently, but help is something I choose to give. It is not something anyone gets to assign. Neither of them argued. Neither of them looked offended. They simply nodded. For the first time in a long while, I felt like they truly understood. Later that afternoon, after they left, I sat alone on my porch wrapped in a warm blanket. My phone buzzed with a message from Carol asking whether I was still joining the cross-country trip in the spring. I smiled and typed my answer immediately. Absolutely. As the sun began to set, I thought about everything that had happened over the past several months. The disappointment, the distance, the difficult conversations. In the end, the greatest lesson had not been for Ethan or Ashley. It had been for me. I had spent years believing that love required endless sacrifice. What I finally learned was something much healthier. Love and self-respect can exist together. Family and boundaries can exist together. And sometimes the most powerful word a person can say is a simple one.
No.
Because that one word gave me something I had almost forgotten I deserved.
My own life.